Okay, so this is a quick video on Revit line work, and specifically at the end of the video, moving Revit line work to Lightburn so we can laser cut and start turning Revit files into physical models. So a couple of things we're going to cover. First, just looking at Revit to do some basic line work, some basic kind of drawings inside of the software. And this is just two-dimensional line work. Okay, this is a model of an elevation. Granted, it's a very bad model of a fairly poor elevation, but just kind of looking at how we can convert either this type of file that's starting to come together or a group of two-dimensional lines showing up in my elevation here. These are just detail lines into things that we can start uh, sending through the laser cutter and cut the lines. So first, the traditional kind of mode of take on this is that we have a three-dimensional model and we need to turn those into laser cut files. Okay, so typically what I would do on something like this is I would start tracing these things out really quickly with a new line style and start building a series of layers that I can cut and glue together to form basically, my physical model out of chipboard or museum board or something like that off of the laser cutter. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is come to manage additional settings and line styles. In this list, we need to add, what I typically do is add two new categories. So I'm going to click new and call the first one laser cut. And I'm going to turn this into super bright green. Okay. And two things that we like to do. We like the green, that's typically our cut line. I like the green lines for use on screen because they really jump off of the white background. It's an easy color to trace with. So I'm going to say okay to that. I'm going to add one more new layer. We'll call this laser engrave. And so the engraving gets us things like, if I want a detail on the surface of something, sort of, you can see it just the corner of it here, like maybe a horizontal brick pattern or vertical siding pattern, something like that. A different color will allow us to say, okay, this is going to be an engrave, this is going to be a cut. And for our system, we like to use red. Again, visually speaking, that red has the tendency to go to the background a little bit, so we're actually getting a little sense of those colors as they might apply to how they're going to play out on a physical model with the laser cutter. So going over a three-dimensional model. So again, you can see that these are walls. These are a little tricky sometimes to convert to laser lines. And I've seen some processes in automating that once it's sort of turned into something two-dimensional. Still haven't seen anything that I like as much as just really quickly tracing things out. So what I typically do with this is go to annotate, detail lines. I'm going to come down to my laser cut line type that I just made from the manage additional setting line styles, right? So annotate detail lines and laser cut. So those are going to show up as bright green. I'm simply going to box out the overall, and I'm going to box out my windows. So pretty simple to quickly trace those as my first layer. I can use the tab key to select all of my detail lines and simply move those up to start sort of a new row of basically the templates that I want to cut and create. And I can do the same thing with my windows. So I'm just going to use my move and move corner to corner so those lock into the exact same place. Remove that one, corner to corner. Sometimes when you get something really, really complicated, a lot of glass, a lot of details in the elevation, it's a little bit trickier to do that than just sort of 3 steps to move those green lines off of this elevation so I can see sort of clearly what I'm wanting to cut. So in that particular case, often I'll find myself using the hide command. So if I just move all that stuff back in place, one of the things that you can do is simply select a detail line and go to your temporary hide and isolate and say isolate category. Now everything is hidden, all the three-dimensional walls, windows, that kind of stuff. And then I can just sort of move that up. I can run reset, and now I also have those back up and away. So if I'm working with the 3D model, that's kind of the approach. I quickly trace the different elements, move them up and away so I can crop and isolate. Now, if I have two-dimensional line work like this, so this is I've just been sort of sketching out an elevation that I want to work with. And in the particular project that I'm working on, we need a series of layers to build up a slightly more complicated or a deeper wall. So let's look at how to start building that as a system as well. So the first thing that I would do is, I don't want to lose this file. Again, this was drawn out using detail lines, both thin, medium, and wide lines. And what I want to simply do is start copying some of these over. So again, I'm going to hover over an outside edge. I'm going to use my tab key to select that entire chain. And I'm going to run copy. Let's just copy this up. I'm going to start a brand new row. Once I have that up, again, I'm going to use the tab key, select all of my lines, and change those from wide lines to my laser cut lines. Super happy with that. I'm going to copy this over for my next layer. And now I want to add in an overall cut for that window. So I'm simply going to trace that in, detail lines, laser cut. Let's do that entire rectangle. And again, I can use my tab key to select that chain of lines. And let's copy that in place. And again, I'm going to use the top left corner to match location to location. So I have that. And then let's add in, these mullions. So my next layer would be this overall. So I'm going to select this group again, not move, copy. And I want to trace out just the mullion detail. So essentially I have an opening, then I have the mullion details. So to do something like that, same trick. Let's go detail lines, and let's draw in each of these elements. So I'm going to quickly select that set of lines. Then I can copy those lines from top corner of the window to, well, top corner of the wrong window there, but let's just move those over to the correct piece. Move that. There we go. And I know I've got 4 of those going down. So we'll just run a copy on those. And I know my mullions were about that thick. I want to spare you all watching me just draw on this video. Oh, I did the last 2 wrong. Undo. There we go. Copy. Move. Move. Let's see if I got that roughly correct. Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to fit inside that window really nicely. Then I would take this group. Let's go from here to here. So essentially, if I'm starting to think of this as a series of things that are going to be cut on the laser, I have my backmost layer. I have an opening. I have my window mullions, and then I have another opening. To build this sort of last part, where I might want to do some laser engraving. First of all, I've got sort of the top and bottom, and then I've got this little water table detail. What I would start with something like this is, let's just copy this layer over one more time, or this group of lines over one more time. And I can really quickly trim these pieces together. So let's trim that to that. Let's trim this to that. And then trim one more time here and here, and here and here. At this point, I can get rid of my upper lines. Don't need those. So this is just creating this sort of base piece. But I want to put a series of lines on here to create a texture, an engraving texture on the cutter, on our laser cutter. So to do that, I'm going to come in and I've got sort of two options. I can go annotate detail line, and at times we need to be able to draw in an engraving line, a line at a time, right? So I can come in and start like putting in like every 3 inches a series of lines, which is a sort of reasonable thing to do, I suppose. But often at times, rather than doing lines one at a time, it's more beneficial to come in and do an entire filled region. So to work with that, I'm just going to come up to my region, filled region, and I already have a hatch pattern that I want to use, which is brick. But let's take a look really quickly at those kind of patterns that we can build. So if I do edit type, right here with brick, under the foreground fill pattern, I can click these 3 dots, and you'll see there are 2 different hatch patterns type, drafting and model. The drafting hatch patterns are going to vary how they're applied based off of your architectural scale. So in other words, if I think about underneath my sections, if I have an earth pattern, so the symbol for that is where I'm cutting through earth, at a 1/4 inch, it's going to represent itself at a different scale than at an 1/8 inch or 16th inch. My model patterns are locked into their size and dimension. So no matter what, if I have a 24 inch by 24 inch ceiling tile, at every scale, it's going to represent itself as a 24 inch by 24 inch ceiling tile. So it's really important to note the difference on those things, okay? So I'm just going to use, for this first pass, just brick. If you'll notice, I've set my foreground pattern color to the same color as my laser engrave lines. I can say OK to that, and then OK, and I am simply going to trace around with my laser cut lines. And so essentially I'll be able to delete that first set of laser lines here in just a second, that basic shape. I can green checkbox, and now I have a hatch pattern. Let's make sure I select it. That is infilled with brick. And so no matter how I change that, that hatch pattern is going to constantly fill. Now I don't want the laser cutter to cut lines twice. So essentially I have a line for the hatch pattern forming the perimeter, and then I have another line that I traced. We want to get rid of those initial lines. So I'm going to select that chain and delete it. I still have my line to cut the edge, and then I have this brick pattern to be engraved. So let's do that trick one more time, but over this top piece. So we'll cut this, or copy this one more time. Let's bring that over. Let's slide my crop box over, and let's build a top piece, but let's use a vertical line, sort of a more customized hatch pattern that we set up. So I'm going to go to Modify, Trim, and we'll trim around this window again. And we'll trim a water table piece back to the top. And now I want to infill this same kind of hatch pattern. So I'm going to go to Annotate, Filled Region, and this time I'm going to go Edit Type, and let's duplicate, and let's call this Vertical Siding. I want to keep my foreground pattern color as red, because again, I'm primarily interested in this driving the laser cutter. I'm going to switch from brick. I'm going to stay in my model lines here, but I'm going to select, let's start with, just so I can walk you through everything, let's start with a 4-inch parallel line. And I am going to duplicate that fill pattern. And so let's call it vertical 4-inch siding. So I've got that, except I didn't actually make it vertical. It's still running horizontal. So let's go edit that fill pattern. And let's change our parallel lines to be running at 90 degrees. So their spacing is 4 inches. They are, so that's 4 inches across. The rotation is 90 degrees to get those running vertical. I can now say okie dokie to that, okay, and okay. Now it's the same process as last time. We are going to trace around the perimeter using our laser cut line. Green checkbox. And now I have that infill pattern. I can delete my chain of lines underneath and then just sort of stack those two things together. Just like that. So this is now a set of lines that are ready to build this wall. I suppose I could do one more set just for fun to build up this sort of ledge piece here. So let's do a quick set of lines like that and another quick set of lines like this. And let's group those together. Move. Let's put them just underneath like that. And let's grab this set. Move. Those are cut lines. So I'm going to change their line type to cut. And I need two of them. So I'm stacking out one more layer higher than this. So copy. Let's do it two more. Something like that. So I have those essentially will be stacking up on top of that layer. So this is all ready to go. To send these to our laser cutter. So our laser cutting software, what's driving the laser cutter is called Lightburn. Great piece of software. Thrilled with it actually, mainly because it is going to import. Our primary mode is importing PDF files. And what's great about that is we don't necessarily have to only use Revit. We can use AutoCAD, Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever is going to generate a vector line. It's going to be very easy to export that to a PDF and import it into Lightburn. So our process specifically from Revit, we need to do a couple of things. Let's delete this so that we can go through it from the very beginning. So the first thing that I want to do is in my elevation view, I want to remove anything extra. So my three-dimensional models, things that I don't want to cut, other patterns that I've built, I want to remove all of those. So with nothing selected in my view, so I'm setting all these up in my east elevation view. With nothing selected in my view, I want to make sure these three boxes right here are turned on for me. So this is crop view, crop region, and annotation crop. This gives me a box around everything that I can use these grips to isolate only the objects that I want cut. Just like that, okay? Next, I want to check my scale. So the project that I'm teaching this for, we are building 1/4 inch scale models. So make sure that we are no longer at 1/8 inch, which is the default, using the architectural template. Change that to 1/4 inch. And now we are ready to set up a sheet to lay out all of our different elevations, all of our different views, whatever we're getting ready to cut. So right here under sheets, I'm going to right click and say new sheet and then load. We have a specific sheet set up for our laser that has the correct perimeters, and that is called Revit Laser Sheet.rfa. It is a Revit family. So we're going to select that and say open. I'm going to select Revit Laser Sheet from my list of sheets and say OK. So this essentially is a close to a 24 by 36. It is slightly cropped in because that basically is the edge that our laser can get to within a 24 by 36 sheet. So what we need to do next is click on my drawings that I want to import, which in this case was the cropped view of my east elevation. And I can simply drag and drop and place that. Our material in the laser is going to be oriented based off of this top left corner. So I can kind of sneak things up reasonably close to that corner. And now I'm ready to print this as a PDF file. So to do that, I'm going to go File, Print. We really like to use Qt PDF. It's a great PDF writer, super small, super simple to use, and it has our default architectural page sizes in it. So highly suggest that. It's excellent to use. We are going to go to Setup. We need to check Center. We need to turn on Zoom to 100% because we need to make sure that this is locked in at 1/4 inch scale. And we are going to change from letter to architecture D. Arc D is 24 by 36. So we'll say OK, and then we'll run our preview. And a couple of things are a little bit off, so let's go back and check that one time. I should see our slightly smaller page from the RFA file, the Revit laser page, should be sitting centered into that. So let's go back to Print and Setup. And let's see where we're at. Yeah, for some reason, that radio button likes to jump from center to offset. So let's change that back to center and say OK. And preview one more time. Yeah, and now I'm centered. You can see that I have the extent that the laser can go inside of a 24 by 36 page, which is exactly what I want. So now we can hit print, and I'm just going to save this as a PDF file. I'm going to write it right to my desktop, and we'll call it Revit Line Work 4. Inside of Lightburn, we'll go File, Import. We will find the Revit Line Work 4 file. And you'll notice it does come in rotated. It's an XY translation issue. Don't know exactly what it is. And frankly, we fix it, but it's that easy to fix the rotation. You're just using the grip. It will rotate freely unless you use the shift key, and then it locks into an incremental rotation, which is perfect. Again, we can left click to select everything, left click and drag a selection box around everything. This middle grip is going to move our line work around. And again, we want to align things in that top left corner. Looks like I have one rogue line. Can probably just select it and delete it. Really like that feature in Lightburn. It's fabulous. Just being able to go in and modify. So again, colors create layers in Lightburn. And you'll notice any of the black lines, like the title block, this is why we're changing things from black lines to red and green. I want to ignore the output on the black lines, right? So that's just, we're turning that off. No output there. The red lines we want to engrave. So I'm going to use 1,000 millimeters per second as my speed, 5% of the laser power. The green lines we want to cut, so I've got those set to 30 millimeters per second on my speed, 90% of the laser power. There's this sort of roguish pink line in there someplace. Don't know what that is. Don't care. Just turned it to output. At this point in time, we're going to select all of our lines. We're going to hit the send button. I'm not actually connected to the laser right now, so that is where essentially everything with the hardware on the laser takes over to complete your cuts. Easy peasy.